morning, and thank you for joining the Lawson Performance Enhancers webinar. This is the same webinar that we've done at a couple of different user groups, and each time we keep adding more items to it. So it's been really well received, and we've had several of the community members submit ideas on how to enhance performance of the Lawson environment. If throughout the course of this presentation you think of other ideas or you've had some in the past that worked for you, please let us know what they are. And as far as questions and things like that go, you can save them until the end. We'd appreciate that. You can always type it in the chat box at the end, and we'll make sure we get to everybody's question. This webinar doesn't usually take us a full hour, so we should be done early, and we'll have plenty of time for your questions, and we'll get to all the detail. So let's go ahead and begin. The webinar is actually divided into several different sections, and how you can optimize security, and how you can optimize your desktop, how you can optimize the system, and the environment itself, and reporting, and several different areas. So we're going to start here with security. If you're familiar with Lawson security, you know that there is a tracing feature. Typically, that if you have tracing turned on, we recommend that you turn it off completely. What tracing does is it's basically recording to a file all kinds of transactions that are happening, and it traces the entire security rule around to kind of, and it gives you specific details of how the security rules are being interpreted. So that's actually a lot of I/O on the disk level, and typically it is not necessary to have on unless you're dealing with a specific issue you're trying to resolve. You would probably have that off. So just making sure that that's turned off, I think, that can affect your performance on the server quite a bit because of all the disk I/O that's involved, and even just the processing that's involved. And the other piece of security is the log levels. Obviously, you know, you can change the log levels within security, and there's different kinds of logging you can have. So there's logging you can have within the ios.log, and logging you can have within laceserver.log, and several different places. So you want to make sure that the log levels make sense for where you are within your implementation. So if you're live in production and things are going well, maybe just you could set the log level to info, or to wherever that critical error level is. So you're only seeing critical errors. There's no reason to see warnings or seeing debug messages or anything like that. The other part of security that I typically see causing issues is the cache interval. Typically, your cache interval is set at 900 seconds. So that's 15 minutes, and that's actually a good place to set it, I think, for production. That basically means that the caching interval for the rules within security happens every 15 minutes. And unless you're having the rules change faster than that, you don't need to increase it or decrease it. Typically, though, when I'm doing an implementation, so when if I'm actually working on a security implementation and we're introducing new rules and doing a lot of setup, I'll reduce that to like 30 seconds, just because I want to make sure that the changes that I'm applying are ready for testing right away. However, I don't think that's necessary on an ongoing basis. So 15 minutes or more would probably be the way to go. And that does affect your performance. I've seen that actually affect performance. The biggest thing goes optimizing security. So you want to make sure that your rules are optimized, and you're not overdoing your access rules. There's not any classes that have tons and tons of rules, because as you know, you'll have to read through the set of rules and reference them back. So that could be a lot of search time and a lot of I/O to just kind of get to the correct security rules. So that optimization can actually go a long way. I've seen clients that have turned on Lawson security and have seen an immediate performance decrease and I've also seen others that have turned on security without seeing any kind of performance decrease. And that really comes down to how well the rules were written, and there's some analysis you can do, but if you're trying to gain a little bit of performance out of security, I really suggest looking at the way you've set up your rules. Reporting. Okay, so this is kind of one of the big things that we notice affect the performance of the environment quite a bit is how reporting is done. So we'll talk about LBI here, but we'll talk about all kinds of reports, really. LBI has two ways of getting into your data. One is ODBC, the other one's OLADB. Actually, there's other ways as well, but we'll talk about these two ways to get directly to the data. So as you know, OLADB is actually going through the Lawson layer itself to kind of get to the data, and it's obeying all the security rules, and it's following Lawson's relationships. It is not going directly to the database, making calls. So the issue with that is that it's very, very, very slow, and it can take a very long time, lots and lots of processing power, and tons of data that go back and forth compared to ODBC. So if your report can be written using ODBC, meaning the security of the data coming back in the report and its audience are not the biggest concern, then I would always opt for ODBC because that's definitely the fastest way to get the data back to LBI or to Crystal reports. However, there are going to be times where OLADB is probably the more preferred way to go. And in that case, there are things you can do to make sure that you're using OLADB correctly. We'll get to that when we get to the add-ins section of this presentation. Sticking with ODBC though, you can build views for complex repetitive queries. So if you've got a query that's somewhat complex, but it's repetitive, you're looking for one of the ones that comes to mind is getting like PO lines, data like detail information, and linking it with vendor and PO information and the customer and whatnot. If you're doing that, you're joining a ton of tables together really at once to get all the data that you want. I don't know, 6 or 7 tables, and depending on what you're getting back, you might be getting a lot of data back. It may be best to just write a view that gives you access to that data and then just make the call against the view rather than having to make the same complex call over and over again. Now, I've seen this actually be faster, and I've also seen it be slower. So it's one of those things you kind of need to try out, I think. I mean, without knowing the complexities of how SQL processing happens on the server, I would say maybe just try it both ways and see which one's faster. But the biggest thing I've seen is this next item is optimizing your SQL queries using some sort of an optimizer. You don't necessarily need an optimizer, guys. There's tons of products out there that can help you optimize your SQL queries. There's even some websites that you can just kind of paste your query into and it will give you some suggestions. But just by kind of looking at your query, a lot of times you can write it better. Typically, I find at many of our customers, the person who wrote the report was probably under the gun to get the report out really fast, and they wrote the very first query that they could think of that was going to get them the results back. The trouble is, typically you're doing that on like a test server with very limited data, so you get, I don't know, 100 rows back or something like that. But then when you move it to production, that same query might return like a couple thousand rows, or even maybe, God forbid, 1 million rows. And they're not very well optimized to handle that sort of volume. So what happens is even though the query was probably running fast enough on the test server, it ends up really kind of taking a dive on the production server. So you want to make sure your queries are well optimized. I find the difference between a really well-written query and a very poor one is about 10 minutes of work. So once you're done writing your query, maybe go back over and figure out if there are certain indices on tables that you can use, or if there are tables you can completely eliminate because a relationship maybe exists between others, or using different types of joins really helps minimize the amount of data that's coming back. So really just a kind of matter of spending a little bit more time usually. Considering using smart reports, I don't know if any of you are familiar with the smart reports product that's out there. I think it was available as of 901.13. I could be wrong, it could have been 901.10. So this is a product that Infor has made available. It's actually quite nice if you can find a good use for it. What you can do is you can take the output of a existing Lawson report and kind of make it nicer and prettier for the screen. You can also do some logic, I believe. I don't quite remember, but a lot of times that's really enough to fit your need. So you may not need to go the route of querying against the database when your data has already been done with a standard report that's sitting in Lawson. So looking into smart reports might be a good idea. It's an easy tool to use. Unfortunately, it's kind of short on documentation a bit, unless there's some that I haven't seen. I've got one piece of documentation I was able to get my hands on, and that helped me kind of get past the hurdles of using it. I'd be more than happy to share that with you guys if you're interested. I think I found it on Lawson support, or somebody maybe sent it to me. But I remember it not being very easy to find. And then the other thing was this ambiguity of whether or not do I even have smart reports installed on my server. I remember that being I was working with a customer, and we just couldn't figure out if we did or not. So it took us a while to kind of figure it out. That's also something that's related to the version of the environment that you have installed. So I believe 901.10, but it could be 901.13. Most of you should probably be on 901.13 by now. If you're on 901, if you're on 10, you definitely have access to it, I think. And I know that as of recently, 901.14 is out, and that I highly recommend. Simply because it lets you access Portal using the Chrome browser, and that's definitely just a great thing because I know a lot of the organizations that we work with are stuck on IE9, and that can be a very slow browser. So that's a huge improvement. Getting on 901.14. So this last item on this slide, it was something that was suggested by a lot of customers that do it this way. So considering a mirror instance of your database for reporting, I think this is a brilliant idea. Simply because, guys, it allows you to shift all the work that's being done on the database from a reporting standpoint to another database, so that the same database is not getting hammered by your application and by your reporting application. So this is one of those things that you have to really kind of consider some decisions on. One of those is if you have a mirror instance of your database, how often are you refreshing that? Is it kind of a real-time thing, or is it happening nightly or weekly or whatnot? How important is it that the reports are done, are accessing real-time data? Typically, it isn't that important. Typically, most of your reports that you're running with LBI can be as of last night. So consider that, and if the answer is yes, then this is definitely the way to go. I'm going to take questions to the end, but this may be a good time to answer the 901.14 question. The 901.14 is an ESP for the environment, for the LSF environment. It's not an MSP. So that hopefully that answers your question. And it's quite easy to apply, guys. there's no reason not to do it. It is a little bit of a I don't want to call it a major change, but there's quite a few things in there that I happen to like. The biggest part being compatibility with additional browsers, and we've got customers that are still using IE8, and a lot of you are still using IE9. But sometimes Lawson isn't the bottleneck there. Sometimes if you have a clinical application that is making sure that you stay on IE9, that could be it. But keeping in mind that your users can install Chrome alongside IE9 is really nice, because then they can start using this modern browser to use Lawson with. So batch programs. So if we were in a room right now, and I guess I could do it, I could do a little poll here, but I think that might take longer than it's worth. A lot of you have batch programs that take a very long time to run. Now, that may be okay in some instances, but if you're trying to close out payroll, for example, and you've got 10,000 plus employees, that's probably a full day's task. Some of you I know are staying late through the night to finish that task. I mean, this is customers that we've dealt with. There is a few things you can do about your batch programs. Okay, without making any modifications, there's a DB admin utility that works with a tool called timestats. You'll have to look up what these are within Infor Extreme, and there's plenty of documentation. And you can actually run DB admin. I believe what you have to do, I don't quite remember the details, but what you have to do is you have to go to your Microsoft file or your Oracle file or your whatever your database file is, and put the DB admin directives in there. And what happens is you actually do it for that specific program. It creates this timestamp file, then you use that file to compile the program with that file. And really the end result is you get a good 5 to 10%, if you're lucky, of performance out of that program. And that could mean the difference between 5 o'clock and 6 o'clock, right? So that's kind of a big deal to a lot of our customers. So I highly recommend that. Setting up your job queues optimally, that can help depending on how many users within your organizations are running batch jobs all day long. We have got some that hardly do. We've got others that literally the queue is just full the whole day. And if you've got an important job that's stuck at the end of a job queue that only allows 2 jobs to run at the same time, the user could be sitting there waiting for some other job to get done. So you might want to separate your job queues. I like giving payroll their own queue, right? So that's kind of a high priority queue they only have access to, and maybe it can take 5 or 10 jobs at a time. I don't know. Like, you just have to consider what you're doing with that. But that could mean the difference between 5 and 6 o'clock also. Building custom indexes. Now, okay, so this is the one where we're getting a little, we're getting at the cutting blade a little bit, but I'm not scared of it, because I know that if I'm building a custom index only to query data with, that doesn't really change things for me very much. But what I can do then is go into some of these batch programs that have taken a very long time and decide, hey, the majority of the time that PR140 spending is looking at this data in a specific way, and I may be able to add an index that speeds that process up a little bit. And yeah, sure, I have a modified PR140 now, but now it runs twice as fast, or maybe 10 times as fast, depending on the program we're talking about. And that could mean the difference between 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock. So that depending on your appetite for modifications, I'd say, this is definitely one that's worth it, just building some custom indices that could help speed up some of these batch programs. All right, now, if you don't remember any of the things that we talked about today, focus on this one. Microsoft add-ins, guys. This is the one that I find is the biggest culprit of why the server is slow, and it's the hardest one to pinpoint and find, because there's really no way for your system administrator to go to the server and say, oh, hey, look at, there's this add-ins process that's really taken up a lot of resources on the server. It's not quite as easy to find. And the problem is we leave our end users in charge of creating their own add-ins, which is fine. It's a great tool for them to have, but a lot of times what they'll do is they'll do an add-ins query in a very complex relationship between a lot of different tables, and they don't put any sort of query result limits on it. And they'll just hit go. And what happens next is you bring down the entire server quite. Like it just you've got one add-ins query that the user is running, and he or she probably is just thinking, okay, well, it's just a long query. It takes a very long time for results to come back. And I don't really blame that person, because the tool should kind of be smart enough not to let you make big mistakes like that. But a lot of times where I see this happening is the same user kind of runs the same query, and while they're running that query, and while that query is running, so it's that the whole server is running a lot slower for everybody. I would sit with your users, look at their queries, and find if there's ways you can improve the queries, set some sort of limitation, maybe add or remove a filter, create a new relationship. Creating a custom relationship in DBDef is a very, very easy thing to do. It does not create that same relationship on the database, so you're not actually creating a new constraint on the database. You're just doing it on kind of the application level. And then you may be able to just use that new relationship within your add-ins. So I would sit with them and go through their add-ins and find out if there's ways you can improve the add-ins, and maybe there are ways we can eliminate the use of some of their add-ins. Maybe there is a way we can write them a query using LBI or some other method that can give them access to the same exact data without them having to run add-ins all the time. Maybe it's something we can do within process one, just automate the thing so they don't have to do it anymore. And this could be the difference maker for you when you're seeing unexplained losses of performance in the middle of the day at sporadic times where things are just really slow. And I see this all the time. So process automation. So there's lots of names for this product now. There's a lot of us still call us process flow. There's a lot of us call it PFI or IPA or LPA or several different names that's gone through over the years, but essentially it's more or less the same as the product we're all used to. The things I would recommend here, and these are the same kinds of problems as reporting and as add-ins, is if you're using the DME node to get data out, you're kind of doing it the slowest possible way. And you have to really ask yourself, is it necessary for me to use the DME node? Is it gaining me something that I can't just get using a SQL node, SQL query node? I don't necessarily recommend doing any SQL updates using the SQL node. You can use the AGS node for making your updates to data. That's the best way to do that. But for queries, guys, DME is just kind of the slowest way of doing things, because it's going to the table direct, and making an application call, sending that data through the different layers that are there within iOS, and also checking security, when really if you're running a process flow, very likely, now not all the time, but very likely, you're not actually concerned with data security, because something's happening on kind of an interface level that doesn't involve security. I don't like getting security errors within my process flows. So what I'd really suggest is using the SQL node to access your data if you're just doing queries, and it can be a lot faster, especially if you write a good query and maybe dump the result of that into a file that you're reading. The other thing I would do is do all of your work inside your queries. a lot of the process flows that I see that other developers have written, what they'll do is they'll do a query, whether they do it within SQL or DME. But if you're doing a SQL query, there's no excuse for this, where the data comes back and then they start parsing the data elements and they modify the data elements and they do sorting on it and they do formatting of the data elements and whatnot. Keep in mind, you can do all of your formatting within your SQL call, and it takes microseconds to do that. Versus if you're doing it within your process flow, it can take more than a second to do that. So that's, a million times more, right? So it's a very substantial difference maker. We've taken process flows that had maybe 30, 40 different nodes in them. One that I believe had 90 different nodes in it, where most of that was making additional queries and sub-queries to get the data back. And then the rest of them were basically formatting that data to write it into a file. We've taken all of that and replaced it with 3 nodes. So you can imagine a 90-node query going to 3 nodes and having a query that would take literally, or a process flow that would take over an hour to complete and having it complete under a second. That can be the difference maker in making things faster on your server. So it's not always, oh, we have a bad install. A lot of times there's just bad practices that are happening. The other thing within process flow, guys, is the logging. I don't know if you've seen your process flow logs. It can be interesting. It can be very, 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 very large, especially your bpm.app file sits on a modern system. It can be a huge, huge file. And it's not always necessary. If you've got your flows that are running well, you don't need those logs necessarily. I don't think you do. I think you can turn them back on whenever you feel like you're having some issues to take a look at that. I personally like building in some logging into my process flows themselves. So there's a database table that I build that the process flows write their status updates to, and that we actually ended up turning into a product, but you can do it yourself. So what's nice about that is there's a database table sitting out there that has the status updates of all the different pieces of every flow in it, and I know at any given time where things are, and if I want to check them, I can, and if I don't have to, and then it just kind of cleans itself as those flows are closed. And that's really nice because I can then run kind of statistical analysis and say, how long do these flows take overall, how many of these kind of end up in error status versus not, versus with these logs, you really can't do any of that. I mean, it's very difficult. And they're taking up tons of I.O. On your, by I.O. I mean input output. They're taking up a lot of I.O. time on your disk drives because they're writing these massive log files, and they're taking up a lot of processing. And it could be a difference maker. Again, it could be the 5 to 10% you're looking for. Also, the other thing that I notice a lot is a lot of process flows are written so that they affect the change that they're trying to make in real time, where I also find that 5 out of 10 times that is not really a necessity, right? So that's not a business requirement for things to get done in real time. It could have been done via batch. So, and keep in mind when you're doing something real time, you're very likely using Axe to affect the change. Versus if you were to consider some equivalent batch process, you might be able to use one of the conversion programs that already exist, or at least save the process for later in the day where there's less users on the server, so it doesn't have to be done real time. That's just a business decision on a case-by-case on each process flow. I just think it's worth mentioning. So another really big one is your database, right? So typically, your database is sitting on its own server, and Lawson is connecting to it, and LBI is connecting to it, and maybe other processes are connecting to it. Sometimes the database is actually sitting on the Lawson server, so and I've actually seen that be a lot faster because that network traffic time sometimes can add some latency to the whole thing. I'm not recommending you put it on your Lawson server. I'm just saying some very small installs that we've seen have done that very successfully. The things that we've seen can really impact performance. One is changing the logging from the logging on the database from full to simple. And that's a maybe, because you're not going to be able to kind of convince everybody that that is a good idea. One thing is for sure, though, in the 16 years or so that I've been working in this environment and worked with hundreds of customers, I've never actually seen an instance where we did a database rollback to go back to a point in time that was a safe place and then just stay there and say, call it a day, oh, everything's great. Typically what we did is we went to an actual backup of the database that had happened the night before. So these logs, guys, are sitting out there really kind of for rolling back purposes. So you can kind of rewind step by step the things that have happened within the database. And I may be wrong, there may be other uses for it, but I've never seen one. So I think that if you turned them off, you wouldn't have, if they had been off this whole time that you had your Lawson installation, you would not have noticed that they're off, other than things would have been a little bit faster. There's a lot of disk I/O that's happening there that you could avoid. Plus, you're taking up a lot of space that you could that I know is at a premium at certain the IT departments. Other than that, just making sure your logs are rotating and they stay compact. The larger these logs get, it's just a kind of a matter of the way NTFS works. It takes a little bit longer to write to a file that's getting bigger. So that's kind of a systematic thing. Not a huge performance gain, but it can be if the file gets very, 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 very large. So I don't see a lot of you making that kind of mistake, though, because typically the installers that do this sort of work, they know to set this up well. We've mentioned this one before, building views for common queries. Obviously, that's a good one, and it can potentially save some processing time, and it can save some disk I/O. And the nice thing with making the same query over and over again, depending on how you've got your database set up, you might be able to take advantage of some caching that the database is doing, and that can speed things up. You'll notice if you go to your database and you run a query for the first time, and you can try this yourself, just join like 3 tables together and run a query. And when you run it, take note of the time it takes for the results to come back and how many records come back. But then run the query, that very same query again, almost immediately, like a minute later. You'll notice it takes less time, and that's because the database has kind of cached some of that data already, and it knows how to get to it a little better. These things are kind of self-learning in a way. They're getting a lot smarter. Spreading your database on multiple spindles. So this is kind of a little bit of a black art. I'm not the guy that would be doing that, but I've seen a customer do this before, and they've gained that extra 2 to 3% that they needed. So this is kind of a cutting-edge customer that speed is a very, very big deal to them. A lot of these suggestions actually came from, I'd say maybe 30% of these suggestions came from working with this one customer and try to speed things up for them. The multiple spindle idea was kind of the like I said, the 2% or 3% gain may not be something that you find worthwhile, but in the case of this customer, it was a very big deal, and it really helped them. So this is basically spreading your database over multiple spindles allows you to optimize the place with which spindle on the disk you start on when you're looking for the data that you're looking for. So you're not searching the disk to get to the part in the database that you want to start your search on. I know that sounds really kind of picky, but it does help. The next thing, the high priority storage, that I've seen make huge differences. Okay, so a local customer here in Southern California that changed just kind of the storage that their database was sitting on. And if you're talking to your network guys and the guys that take care of your network storage, they will tell you, yes, we have high priority storage, we have some medium priority storage, and we have some low priority storage. Low priority storage is usually for kind of archiving things, and then the middle stuff is for almost everything else. And the high priority should really be reserved for these where your databases sit, and maybe some of your applications or whatnot, and maybe take the pages that are being served very quickly on the web that you want to make sure are sitting on high priority. But just kind of check with them. If things are running slow, ask them, hey, the place where the database is stored, is that a high priority storage? Because, like I said, we've seen a 20 to 30% gain in performance at one customer by just changing which storage they had their database sitting on. So that's a really big deal, guys. 30% is definitely the difference between 5 o'clock and 10 o'clock at night. So keep that one in mind. Tuning your database for your use. So this is kind of working with your DBA and potentially an external DBA that knows that flavor of your database well and the kind of usage you're doing. There could be little things you do there that can speed things up, and we've had a couple customers do that successfully. Not very many. I mean, there's not a whole lot you can do with Lawson. It's actually more or less a very simple database structure. So on the operating system, so this is on the operating system where Lawson is installed. Obviously, upgrading your system resources, that kind of goes without saying. So your processor, RAM, and faster disk and whatnot. So that's kind of a given, and a lot of you are virtualized now. So doing that kind of thing is very easy to do. It requires, 10, 20 minutes of downtime, and all of a sudden you get twice as much RAM, and it costs almost nothing. So there's no reason not to throw more resources at things. I know it used to be, hey, I'd like to solve the real problem without having to throw resources. I know that's a very pragmatic way of approaching the problem, but really when it costs a little and it's so easy to do, I don't see the need to be that pragmatic about solving the performance issues. If that helps, then you should probably just do it. Tuning WebSphere, there are some tuning parameters, guys, that you can change. I've got a customer that's sending me some ideas that they've tried recently successfully because they had someone from IBM actually come on site and help them out. And they said that they were able to get rid of some errant Java processes and some other issues that they were having. We've got our own WebSphere guy that we work with. He's been great at helping us tune certain instances a little bit, but there's not a whole lot of tuning parameters, so very likely I wouldn't be too paranoid about this because I think you're probably set up okay. And again, for your operating system and your environment, just considering using higher priority network storage. Considering vertical scaling, so that's just kind of scaling in general, figuring out what works best for you. Just work with a consultant or with with Infor to figure out what might be the best way to go for your organization. We're happy to help. Turning on DEP is called Data Execution Prevention on Windows for Essential Services. Okay, so this is something our installer suggested, and he found that this actually helped quite a bit to speed the server up. You'll have to do your own research on data execution prevention, but a quick search on Google will give you all that you need, but just write that term down. Mining your antivirus application, guys, this is a really big deal. So if you have an antivirus application installed on your Lawson server, I have to ask you why you have that. I mean, is your server exposed to the internet in some way? Because it shouldn't be. Is there not a firewall and other measures that are holding, that are keeping your server from being infiltrated? there should be other measures. Now, when you have an antivirus software installed, you better make sure that you've tuned it well so it ignores things that it thinks Lawson's doing that it doesn't like, because it can really hold, it can really basically slow things down. So either get rid of it or spend some time working to figure out what's wrong with it, because this has been one of those things that has halted us in installing applications or even patches. It has, kind of slowed things down quite a bit, so you got to make sure that isn't it. On the user's machine, guys, I have an item to add to this, but really kind of the same stuff as for the server: more RAM, faster disk space, and potentially just a kind of an upgrade. Running some cleaner applications like CCleaner sometimes helps. Uninstalling unwanted applications, making sure you're in the right version of Java, things like that. Kind of a no-brainer. But of all of these, the ones that I find help the user most is more RAM and a faster disk drive. The faster disk drive is pretty amazing how much that helps. I know for a fact that the disk drives that you have today versus the ones 5 years ago even are 3 times faster. So that could be a major difference maker, and they're very, very cheap. So you can get a very, very fast hard drive for about $100. That probably is bigger and way faster than the hard drive that you currently have in there. So that could be a big difference maker. It's not the kind of thing every IT department can just put together very quickly, but if you've got a high priority user, like the person running your payroll applications, for example, and you want to give them the best chance to do what they're going to do, get them the faster disk, get them more RAM, and maybe the other thing I suggest, a lot of them are using Wi-Fi these days. Maybe just get them, a network jack they can just plug their laptop into so that they can, take advantage of faster network speeds and not have any kind of potential to drop off. Using the modern browser, we talked about 901.14. That's a big one, guys. I mean, these modern browsers, Chrome processes JavaScript something like 1,000 times faster than IE9 does, maybe even more. I don't know, maybe 10,000 times faster. Who knows? So that could really speed things up. And then less intrusive internet security. So making sure that obviously we want antivirus installed and things like that on the user's machine, but just gotta go make sure you're going through the rules and you exclude traffic coming in from the Lawson server from being monitored, because who cares? That's traffic that we don't want to interrupt to look at with our antivirus. And I've seen that actually speed up a user's experience quite a bit, maybe like double. So they had some weird internet security application installed, and it was basically examining every packet that was coming in, even if it was coming from the Lawson server. So the minute we excluded that server, things sped up for her. So that was a great win. In general, just keeping logs small and rotating often. All the logs on the server, the bigger the logs get, the harder, the longer it takes to write to them and read from them. So that's kind of an obvious one. Reducing your log levels to the minimum that you require. Now, that may not be the minimum, and it may not be the minimum for every log level, but it certainly shouldn't be the highest for all. So somewhere in the middle is part of your balance. Purging large tables when possible. So this is a big one, especially when it comes to process flow. So you notice that purge work units there. And there's purge programs. There's a Perl script you can run that actually does this work for you. But other than just process flow, guys, I mean, I've seen some of these process flow tables get to like 60 million records. That's unacceptable, because that can really slow everything down. And it's one of those things that you're probably not even thinking about or checking. So I would consider, just if you're on lid, type and count Logan, and you'll see how big some of your process flow tables are. And I venture to guess that if you've been running process flow for years without cleaning up, you've got some working in variable tables that are probably in the several million range already. and you should really consider cleaning those up. But even with like regular Lawson tables, there's purge programs you can run to purge out records that you no longer need. That's obviously a business decision. I would not do that as a system administrator. Make sure you test things out in your test system before you do anything like that, but that can really help things out as well. And this last one goes without saying, guys, but honestly, I've seen it happen so many times now that I had to mention it. Don't contend with replication and backups. So what does this mean? Typically at your company, your backups are running, I don't know, probably they start at like midnight and they run till like 2 a.m. and everything's done and everybody's happy. And so I'll just tell you a story rather than tell you what to do, and then I think you'll take the right things away from it. We were at a customer that we did an upgrade on recently, and that upgrade took place and it was fine, and we did that on their test server. Everything was fine. We tested everything several times. We did several runs of everything, and then when we did it on production, the next day when we came in, you know, we'd gone live because everything checked out fine, but the next day things were really, really, really slow. So we check all the regular things, all the slides you've seen so far. We've checked all of those, and that wasn't the problem. And we called the network guys, and we're like, hey, you know, what's going on? None of them knew why we had a problem. We worked with the guy who managed the virtual machine. He didn't have any ideas. And then we talked to the person who is in charge of backups, and he said, no, the backups are on at midnight and they're done by 2 a.m. So we kind of like disregarded it. But then several days later, when we finally came back to him, we're like, can you check that backup to make sure that it is complete? You know, because we might actually have to go back to this, like, oh, you know what? That backup is actually still running. So you'll be surprised how often this happens. What happens is when you make a lot of, so what happens with some of your backups are being done incrementally. So as changes are taking place, those incremental changes are being backed up. And the problem is when you're making large changes to the server, like an upgrade, for example, and it's kind of continuous and it takes several hours, that backup process never really catches up with itself. It knows this is a lot of changes, it backs them up, but as it's backed them up, there's changes to the things that you already recorded. So it can go back and forth. And then for some reason, some of these backup applications can kind of get stuck in this loop where they think they've backed something up, but they back it up again, and then it kind of goes back and forth, and it just never stops. So just making sure that you're not contending with the backup is a big deal, because this was like a 40% performance decrease. I mean, things were, you know, that backup process was basically trying to redo itself over and over and over again for like 4 days. So when we finally, you know, put the stop to that, things came back to normal, and all was well. This is my last slide, my contact information. If you have any questions after today, you're more than welcome to reach out. But we'll start the Q&A now, and if you have any questions, just go ahead and type them into the lower left corner of your screen. Also, if you have any suggestions, please type them there so I can add them to this presentation before I make them available to you. This will be available for download and viewing on our website in a few days. All our webinars are there, by the way, nogalis.com/education. We have an education link on our front page. You can just go there. Every webinar we've done in the past is there, so you should be able to see it. If you go to 901.14, can you stay on 901.13 apps? Yes, you can. In fact, I don't think there is anything newer than that for apps anyway. So, yeah, it's compatible both ways. So we've got a few of these 901.14 upgrades now, and I haven't seen any issues. So that's been a good thing. Definitely a worthwhile upgrade, especially just getting Chrome out of the deal. I think is a huge win. I don't know if a lot of you use Chrome or not, but it is a very, very good experience compared to using IE9. Any other questions, guys? What was the command you mentioned about looking up logs in lid? Looking up logs in lid. I don't think there is not a specific command, but if you go to the Lotters system directory, that's where a lot of your log files sit. And then in the same place, you'll see a lot of files with the extension .properties, okay? So you have like iOS logging .properties. And those .properties files, actually, a lot of them, not all of them, but a lot of them are kind of responsible for how your logs are getting created. So I would start with those. There's other places, like everything kind of does its own logging separately, like within security, you can turn logging and logging on and off within the Lawson Security Administrator. So there's kind of a lot of that going on. And guys, we focused all of this stuff on the 901 application. I didn't do it on 10 because I know based on the survey that we did of the crowd that a lot of you are not on 10 yet. So a lot of this applies to 901, but a lot of it, almost all of it, applies to 10 as well. So if you're using LSF on 10, you'll be there. So I've got Joe is asking, if you create views and custom indexes, those will get blown away when you upgrade, correct? Do they get, not quite, no. Views should not get blown away when you upgrade. But, I keep good documentation so that you can recreate them. Basically, I don't think views will get blown away, but your indexes probably will. So you just want to keep really good docs on any changes that you make. Yeah, like, for example, we work with a customer who's got 700 plus modifications to the Lawson code base. Of those, probably a good 150 of them have changes to the database. They're very well documented, so really when we do the upgrade, it takes, I don't know, about 15 minutes to go through and apply those changes again. Maybe a little longer, maybe a couple hours, I don't know, depending on how big some of them are lots and lots of custom tables that we just kind of have to go and make sure that they exist. But really, it doesn't take very long. So I think Michael's answering, yes, but there are steps that you can take to migrate the metadata back. That's true. There are metadata utilities and documentation that can show you how to perform these steps. Thanks, Michael. Yeah, that's a good point. Any other? So Anthony is saying, for the Lawson Security Administrator, you said something in the beginning about tracking. Is that the same as logging? I have changed the caching interval, but not tracking. Okay, no, it's not the same. There's 3 tabs near the top of that server bit, and I meant tracing. I might have said tracking. I apologize if I did. Tracing is what you want to turn off. So it can be very useful if you're trying to debug a very difficult to debug problem. I've never found it useful even for that because I can typically find the problem before I turn tracing on. But then I've been working with this stuff every day ever since it's been out. So sometimes you do need to turn tracing on to find your issue, but it should be off for the most part. Now your it is near the bottom. Now. One of the things that you might see is your auditors might come back and say, oh, well, we need that tracing information to know who's accessing what within the application. Well, really, I mean, I can give you a really great security report of who's got access to what, but really the tracing information is very difficult to read through. It generates megabytes after megabytes of files every so many minutes. I mean, things are not they don't have longevity. They don't stay very long. So I don't think it's a very good tool for auditing. I think that's a bad argument. But I'm not one to fight auditors, so it's up to you. But I definitely turned it off. Any other questions or suggestions? And guys, if you have other suggestions, please send them to me. My email is on the screen right now. I'd like to hear them because I will add them to this very same presentation, and I will send them back out to you. You'll get an email from Kelly or from myself in a few days when we upload this to the web, so you can review it, and the video will be there, and so will the presentation. So it looks like that's it. Thank you guys for joining the webinar. Really appreciate it. Thank you, and hope to see you again soon. You'll get an email with a notification for our upcoming webinars. We should have one pretty soon. If you have suggestions for other webinars, guys, the best thing to do is just go to our site, go to the education section. There is a little form on the education page that you can submit suggestions to us, and this is where we get all the ideas for the webinars that we do, and really look forward to hearing back from you. Thank you very much. Have a great day.